to representation. We're going to talk about seller representation or listing agreements, and then we'll talk about buyer representation a little later. A listing agreement is an employment contract appointing a broker as a special agent for the specific purpose of finding a buyer who's ready, willing, and able to buy. A listing agreement in most states must be in writing to be enforceable in court because it's an employment contract. The listing is a contract owned by the brokerage. When we talk about listing agreements, there's a few types that we want to go over. The first type of listing agreement is the exclusive right to sell listing. With an exclusive right to sell listing, the listing brokerage is paid the commission if the property sells during the term of the listing. With an exclusive right to sell listing, the seller authorizes only one broker as the seller's sole agent. An exclusive agency listing is another type of listing agreement. With an exclusive agency listing, the listing broker is paid the commission if the property sells during the term of the listing, unless the seller finds the buyer himself. If the seller finds the buyer himself, the seller is not obligated to pay the brokerage a commission with an exclusive agency listing. With an exclusive agency listing, the seller still authorizes only one broker as the seller's sole agent, but the contract itself allows the seller to retain the right to sell the property without the obligation of paying a commission. So if the seller sells the property himself, he doesn't owe the brokerage a commission. The next type of listing agreement is not very often done, but we'll talk about it anyway. It is the open listing or non-exclusive listing. It is the default type of listing if the listing agreement does not specifically create one of the other kinds of agency. So an open listing is the default listing if the listing agreement does not specifically create an exclusive agency. With an open listing, the seller may list the property with multiple brokers at the same time and obligate the seller to pay a commission only to the broker who produces a ready, willing, and able buyer. In other words, with an open listing, whoever sells the property first wins the commission. With a net listing, a net listing specifies that the seller will receive a net amount of money from the sale of a property, and any excess money going to the listing broker as commission. So the seller identifies how much they want to receive, and anything over and above that net amount would go to the brokerage as a commission. With a net listing, there's an inherent conflict of interest. So net listings are either illegal or discouraged in most states because of the conflict of interest between the broker and the property owner. Listing agreements have some essential elements. There's a few items that must be in every listing agreement. So we'll go over those. First of all, listing agreements are employment contracts. Therefore, listing agreements have to be in writing and signed. Listing agreements have to identify the amount and method of compensation, either a flat fee, a percentage of the sales price, or some other form of payment. But remember, Commissions are negotiable in all cases. Another item that must be on every listing agreement is the price the seller is willing to accept. The legal description of the property must be on the listing agreement. Financing terms the seller is willing to accept must be on every listing agreement. And the listing agreement must have a specific termination date. A lot of listing agreements contain a broker protection clause, also called an extension clause, or a holdover clause, or a safety clause. A few things to keep in mind about the obligations of the listing broker and the licensees employed by the listing broker. One of the obligations, or the first obligation, the most important obligation, would be to present all written offers as soon as possible, unless otherwise specified in writing. And remember, a brokerage can only pay referral fees to other brokers, never to another broker's salesperson or broker associate, and never to an unlicensed person. No fees or commissions can be paid to unlicensed people. Another obligation of a listing brokerage, if the buyer is not represented, would be to recommend that the buyer have a home inspection to check for latent defects and environmental issues and that type of thing. And remember to make certain that the buyer has received the seller's property disclosure before banking an offer. If the seller has misrepresented a latent defect in their disclosure, as long as the broker or licensee employed by the broker have performed a visual inspection and found no obvious defects, the broker would not be held liable for the misrepresentation.